Why was FBI Director James Comey not invited to that summit?
Well, a couple of reasons. One is his boss was. The nation's top law enforcement official, Attorney General Eric Holder, attended. The third is, there was we wanted to make sure that there wasn't that there wasn't a perception that this conference was overly focused on law enforcement tactics.
All right, folks. We could keep playing that all day, and it just defies logic and is frighteningly chilling coming from this administration. Joining us now is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam. There it is up on your screen, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, doctor.
It's great to be with you, Steve. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, great to talk to you again. All right, I mean, when you hear the president's spokesman say the FBI director wasn't invited to the summit on terror because we didn't want to give the impression that this was about law enforcement and going after the terrorists, I mean, don't you want to just bang your head against the wall?
These guys I think are just playing it as it comes, and they have no strategy and no overall vision of where the problems are and where it needs treatment. I mean, on the one hand, this was one big summit that should have been probably 2 or even 3 summits because, when you're fighting terrorism, terrorism is a tactic, and certainly we want to have a strategy against that. But if all you're doing is fighting the terrorism, which is really what the FBI, Homeland Security, and others would do, it's still a whack-a-mole program. And my sense in the response they just gave was that they didn't want to invite the head of the FBI because they wanted to address root causes, which was something they kept saying. Well, the root cause, he mentioned fascism that we defeated. The president mentioned communism in the Cold War. And then he said, now we're fighting violent extremism, which is a tactic. He didn't mention the ideology, which is Islamism. This should have been a conference on countering violent Islamism, not extremism. And this is the problem, is that yet he invited who? He invited not only domestically many of the wrong groups that are apologists for Muslims, but globally he invited the ministers of all these foreign countries that are basically feeding the ideologies that are creating these monsters like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and others. And I use it as an analogy like saying you're having a conference on drug-related violence and inviting the meth distributors to help you.
Yeah, well, look, this isn't going to change for the next 2 years. I think, Doctor, the question is, will it be too late for the next president, if the next president isn't Hillary, because she'll never change it either, to actually talk about the problem, do a 180, and go after radical Islam and call it radical Islam?
Well, ultimately, America has never been shy to get to the task that we need at hand when we are called to do it with the right leadership. And ultimately, I think it's never too late as long as they don't get nuclear weapons and the Iranian Shia jihadists do not do so, or Assad and others. I mean, ultimately, we want to see, you can't get rid of ISIS without having a bigger strategy against Assad, Iran, and others that are trying to play this radical card to destabilize the Middle East and allow the old guard to continue to maintain power. But the long-term vision is one of a liberty doctrine, to promote liberty, while the short-term vision is really looking upon this as simply more of a criminal problem that needs jobs and other distractions, right, which really don't want to address the ideologies.
All right, so who's going to win the battle for the soul of Islam?
Well, I like to look at it, even though there's some differences in the analogy. Who won the battle for the soul of Christianity when America was created and theocracy was defeated, and we had Jefferson and Paine and others that ultimately defeated what theocracy was doing to Christendom in the West? I think Islam is in the same time today. We see theocrats, whether it be Shia theocrats in Iran, the Brotherhood in Egypt, the Islamists, the Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. This is not just ISIS that has this Islamic problem that we don't want to name, but it's a global problem of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. I have an in-depth interview at the National Review that Catherine Lopez did with me, in which I talk about what are the steps of reform necessary, the separation of mosque and state. So defeating terrorism is one symptom. the bigger problem under that iceberg is a much bigger problem of the Islamic State. So what drives ISIS members is Islamo-patriotism, the sense that they want to die for the Islamic State or all Islamic states, versus Muslims like me that wanted to die for American liberty and freedom, which is why I joined the Navy. So the ultimate who's going to win
Doctor,
that,
let me just ask you before we run out of time. They say it's a small, teensy-weensy, itsy-bitsy percentage, and it doesn't represent Islam. And you just described something that says to me it's a huge percentage, maybe a majority that think like the ISIS people.
Well, it's not necessarily the ISIS folks. The majority is the Brotherhood won an election in Egypt, but now they were displaced by a majority of Muslims that didn't want them when they realized what they were. So the ideology is 30 to 40%. The militants are 5 to 10%, and we will lose if all we do is focus on the militants.
Right, gotcha. All right, Doctor, great talking to you. Great book, folks. Battle for the Soul of Islam. We'll speak to you soon, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Anytime.
All right, up next, ladies and gentlemen, the Malzberg panel.